Opening the center immediately offers a strategic battleground for early piece development. Unfolding the knight here prepares for central pawn advances and keeps options open for a flexible pawn structure later. Immediately staking a claim in the center and preparing for central pawn advances creates immediate territorial advantage. Solidifying the center, this move prepares for kingside development and a potential queenside counterattack. Reinforcing the central pawn structure, this knight aims to dominate key squares and prepare for further development, potentially eyeing the e5 advance. Embracing the queen's gambit declined, black aims to solidify central presence and prepare for active piece play. Prying open the center, this pawn exchange offers immediate activity and a chance to influence crucial diagonals. Reclaiming the center with the pawn solidifies black's pawn structure and opens diagonals for pieces. Unpinning the knight strategically opens a diagonal for the bishop, pressuring black's center and potentially influencing the kingside soon. Solidifying the central pawn structure, black prepares to develop their pieces harmoniously and contest the e4 square. Securing the queen and preparing for a queenside pawn push, aiming to restrict black's development. Solidifying the pawn chain's integrity while preparing for castling is a prudent step. Solidifying the center and preparing for kingside castling, this move emphasizes queenside piece development. Securing the monarch behind a pawn shield is a fundamental defensive priority, preparing for potential action. Developing the bishop here aims to control the long diagonal and prepare for kingside castling, fostering harmonious piece deployment. Developing the knight to d7 supports the central pawn tension and prepares for potential h6 to challenge the bishop. Developing the knight to its natural square bolsters central control and prepares for a kingside castling maneuver. Bringing the rook to the open file is a sound positional maneuver, preparing for potential central advances or pressure on the d-file. Securing the kingside through castling initiates a period of quiet coordination, preparing to connect the rooks and potentially challenge central control. Shifting the knight to f8 aims to reroute it, potentially to g6 or h5, to contest white's central space and shore up the kingside. Initiating queenside expansion with rab1, preparing to challenge black's central pawn structure and potentially open lines for an attack. Opening up lines on the queenside, this prepares to challenge white's central influence. Solidifying the center and preventing bishop incursions allows white to prepare for a queenside expansion. Initiating development of the queen's bishop, this piece now aims to contest the crucial central diagonals, potentially preparing a queenside pawn advance. Reinforcing the central pawn structure and preparing for a potential kingside advance, this rook repositions efficiently to aid in controlling open files. Reuniting the bishop with its comrades offers a more balanced development and prepares for potential piece exchanges. Initiating a central pawn thrust to seize space and challenge black's islanded queenside pawns. Black accepts the pawn challenge, opening lines but potentially weakening their central control for a moment. Centralizing the knight seizes the initiative, preparing to attack the weakened black king and opening lines for piece activity. Relocating the bishop to c7 enhances its diagonal reach and prepares for a potential kingside attack later. Unleashing a knight to attack two pieces simultaneously, seeking to disrupt black's harmony. Reclaiming the bishop to a more active diagonal, finally untangling the queenside. Unleashing the bishop to exploit the open diagonal, white aims to pressure black's weakened kingside while preparing for a pawn storm. Boldly challenging the bishop's influence, this maneuver aims to seize initiative by disrupting white's pawn structure and opening lines for counterplay. Exchanging the bishop opens a diagonal for white's queen and aims to simplify into a favorable endgame where white's active pieces can dominate. Re-establishing the rook on its 7th rank asserts control over the central file and prepares for potential queenside advances. Unlocking the c-file is white's immediate priority, challenging black's bishop's crucial diagonal influence. Doubling pawns on the d-file relinquishes central influence and creates an isolated pawn weakness for black. A bold exchange, simplifying into a potentially favorable endgame where white can exploit the open files. Reclaiming the pawn opens the queen to a more active central role, contesting the e-file and preparing for potential pawn breaks. Controlling the queenside now, this queen's repositioning aims to exploit open lines and potentially pin down black's rook. Securing the rook's escape route and preparing for potential pawn advances while white's queen eyes the queenside. A direct attempt to exploit the weakened light squares around black's king and create potential mating threats. Asserting control over the file with the rook prepares for future activity and potential counterplay against white's queenside structure. Reasserting control over the central file, the rook prepares to join the queenside action, potentially forcing a pawn exchange or creating space for further penetration. Re-establishing the bishop's diagonal offers more active piece play, aiming to challenge white's central pawn. Centralizing the rook fortifies the e-file and prepares for potential breakthroughs, asserting pressure on the queenside. Reinforcing the kingside structure, this defensive maneuver aims to prevent potential pawn pushes or piece intrusions. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure, this move prepares for a potential expansion while defensively reinforcing the b2 pawn. Challenging the queenside pawn structure directly creates immediate tactical complications. Opening that queenside file, white aims to exploit the newly created pathway for activity. Reclaiming the queenside initiative, this squares the bishop's influence and prepares to support the rook's advance. Unleashing a knight to e5 aims to disrupt black's queenside pawns and potentially infiltrate enemy territory. Trying to regroup and simplify, but the passed pawn on might become a serious issue. Asserting control over the queenside begins here, potentially isolating black's rook and creating lasting queenside weaknesses. Reclaiming central squares and preparing a knight outpost offers black a dynamic counterplay. Sacrificing the b7 pawn to pry open the queenside and exploit the exposed black king. Black finally addresses the queen invasion, simplifying and accepting the pawn deficit. Seizing the isolated queen's pawn offers a material advantage, though vigilance against black's active pieces is paramount. Bringing the bishop back to c8 attempts to untangle black's pieces and prepare for pawn advances, but it concedes considerable space on the queenside. Reclaiming a central outpost for the knight, this repositioning aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and prepare for further kingside incursions. Re-establishing knight activity is a solid, yet somewhat passive, maneuver given the queen's departure. Purging a knight secures a passed pawn, simplifying into a favorable endgame scenario for white. Bishops find their scope on this open diagonal, eyeing the weakened king and white's isolated pawn. Clearing the file offers a timely opportunity to activate the rook. Recapturing with the bishop allows black to begin redeploying pieces toward the kingside. A subtle redeployment of the knight aims to anchor control of the central squares, anticipating a pawn push or preparing for potential queen activity. Reclaiming the central files after exchanges, black activates their bishop, eyeing potential breakthroughs on the queenside. Reasserting control over the central light squares forces black to defend his isolated pawn structure. This king's repositioning aims to activate him, potentially eyeing central squares as the pawn structure simplifies. Reinforcing the pawn structure, this move aims to create a solid barrier against black's knight infiltration. Relocating the king to the center prepares for potential pawn advances and centralizes it for defensive duties. Bringing the monarch towards the center unlocks its defensive potential and prepares for a more active role in the unfolding middle game. Activating the king is paramount for coordinating defenses and launching counterplay in the endgame. Creating a new defensive pawn wall to restrict the enemy bishop's influence and consolidate the king's safety. The king's exposed position on the queenside invites immediate tactical skirmishes. A more prudent retreat to consolidate would have been wiser. Shifting the rook to the third rank offers active defense and prepares to contest the open file. Seeking to reposition the bishop to a more active square, this move prepares for potential pawn advances on the king side. A forced king march is initiated, driving the black monarch into a vulnerable corner position. The king ventures out, seeking activity but exposing its own flank to the unleashed rook. Forcing the black king to a less active square, this discovers an attack on the rook and clarifies the endgame.